unfortunate people do not discuss description of the Vaikuntha planets, but engage in topics which are unworthy to hear and which bewilder one's unfortunate people. Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and talk and take to talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. Purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. The most unfortunate persons are the impersonalists who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. They are afraid to talk about the beauty of the Vaikuntha planets because they think that variegatedness must be material. Such impersonalists think that the spiritual world is completely void, or, in other words, that there is no variegatedness. This mentality is described here as ku kata mati gani, intelligence bewildered by unworthy words. The philosophies of voidness and of the impersonal situation of the spiritual world are condemned here because they bewilder one's intelligence. How can the impersonalist and the void philosopher think of this material world, which is full of variegatedness, and then say that there's no variegatedness in the spiritual world? It is said that this material world is the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So unless there is variegatedness in the spiritual world, how can there be temporary variegatedness in the material world? That one can transcend this material world does not imply that there is no transcendental variegatedness. Here in the Bhagavatam, in this verse particular, it is stressed that people who try to discuss and understand the real spiritual nature of the spiritual sky and the Vaikunthas are fortunate. The variegatedness of the Vaikuntha planets is described in relation to the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. But instead of trying to understand the spiritual abode and the spiritual activities of the Lord, people are more interested in politics and economic developments. They hold many conventions, meetings, and discussions to solve the problems of this worldly situation, where they can remain for only a few years, but they are not interested in understanding the spiritual situation of the Vaikuntha world. If they are at all fortunate, they become interested in going back home, back to Godhead. But unless they understand the spiritual world, they rot in this material darkness continuously. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Well, this is a very important verse because it explains the unfortunate life of a Mayavadi or an atheist. Mayavadis, although they claim to have, they claim to be Vedantas, but actually the intelligence has been stolen because they engage in all kinds of speculation. And it says, it is very much regrettable that unfortunate people do not discuss the description of the Vaikuntha planets, but engage in topics which are unworthy to hear and which bewilder one's intelligence. Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take to talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. Do we have the Isha Upanishad here?
Yes, right there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Mantra 9 says, those who engage in the culture of nescient activities, Nesha means ignorant activities, shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. This is a very important verse. Anam tamaha pravisanti ye vidyam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yayu vidyayam bhataha. Prabhupada says this mantra offers a comparative study of vidya and avidya. Vidya means knowledge, avidya means ignorance. Avidya or ignorance is undoubtedly dangerous, but vidya or knowledge is even more dangerous when mistaken or misguided. This mantra of Shisha Upanishad is more applicable today than at any time in the past. Modern civilization has advanced considerably in the field of mass education. But the result is that people are more unhappy than ever before because of the stress placed on material advancement to the exclusion of the most important part of life, the spiritual aspect. As far as Vidya is concerned, the first mantra has explained very clearly that the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything, and that forgetfulness of this fact is ignorance. The more a man forgets this fact of life, the more he is in darkness. In view of this, a godless civilization directed toward the so-called advancement of education is more dangerous than a civilization in which the masses of people are less educated. Now let's discuss this question. This is very, very interesting. What is Prabhupada saying? He says, it's better to be less educated than be a Mayavadi who's engaging in all kinds of speculation and learning all kinds of mundane knowledge. Mundane knowledge will not help a person be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But this is what most people are learning today, mundane knowledge. Most people, most students are learning. They're learning so many things, but not anything about Vaikuntha and Krishna. And because of that, they will see Yamaraj instead of Krishna at the moment of death. And that's a real shock. It says, as far as Vidya or knowledge is concerned, the first mantra has explained very clearly, first mantra of the Isha Upanishad, that the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything. And that forgetfulness of this fact is ignorance. So everything, including our body, our mind, everything, our car, our house, everything belongs to Krishna. Nothing belongs to us. Krishna is the supreme proprietor of everything. So therefore it says in the first mantra of each of Upanishad, Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamidachite Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamidam Vasishyate. The personality of God is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. So that means that you can never, now Krishna has never, let's say, diminished in any way. Let's say millions of living entities emanate from Krishna, and Krishna still remains whole. He's never diminished. Now this is the meaning of this first mantra of Isha Upanishad. Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamidachite Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. as many perfect unities are emitted from the body of Krishna, does not diminish Krishna in the least, because he has infinite potential. So this first mantra says, everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as quota, as his quota. One should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Okay. One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way. For that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative to this way for man. So in other words, if we understand that everything in this world, including our own body and mind, belong to Krishna, and Krishna is the owner of this body. So if Krishna is the owner of the body, then we should only use it in Krishna's service. We shouldn't use it in any other service. And if we accept only those things that are necessary to keep the body and the soul together, and not more, in other words, having a minimalist life. What is a minimalist life? You don't eat too much, you don't eat too little. You don't earn too much, you don't earn too little. You don't talk too much, talk too little, you only talk about Krishna. So one should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota. That means that everyone has a quota in life that has been given by Krishna based on their previous karma. If we're satisfied with that and don't try artificially to get more than what is absolutely necessary and which is set aside as our quota, then we can live for, as it says, Kurban evam karmani jiva chektatam samaham evam tvayi najatetu sthira karma vite nare. One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way. In that way, meaning the previous verse, accepting the minimum and understanding that everything belongs to Krishna, and he has set aside for everyone their minimal needs. Therefore, we don't have to extraneously work day and night, completely in a mode of passion, trying to make more and more and more and more money. Rather, we should live very economically as a minimalist and use extra money in the service of Krishna. That is what's being said here. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota. And one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Well, everything belongs to Krishna. So we should use whatever extra there is in the service of Krishna. Otherwise, we get zapped by Maya. And therefore, the mantra 2 says, one may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way. For that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative to this way for man. Okay, so this is a very interesting purport in Ishapanishad. I'm going to read it. No one wants to die. Everyone wants to live as long as he can drag on. This tendency is visible individually, but also collectively in the community, society, and nation. There is a hard struggle for life by all kinds of living entities, and the Vedas say that this is quite natural. The living being is eternal by nature, but due to his bondage in material existence, he has to change his body over and over. This process is called transmigration of the soul or karma bandhanam, bondage by one's work. The living entity has to work for his livelihood because that is the law of material nature. And if he does not act according to his prescribed duties, he transgresses the law of nature and binds himself more and more to the cycle of birth and death in many species of life. Okay, so that's a very important statement. The living entity has to work for his livelihood because that is the law of material nature. And if he does not act according to his prescribed duties, he transgresses the law of nature. Now let's discuss that. What are these prescribed duties? Prescribed by who, by the way? By the government or by Krishna? So there are two sets of duties we have in life. There's mundane duties that are established by mundane politicians and mundane philosophers and so forth. And there are transcendental duties established by Krishna himself. So we have these two sets of duties in life: material duties and spiritual duties. Now, the material duties, the more one has spiritual knowledge, the more those material duties are limited. In other words, gradually there is what you would call downsizing in material life. At one point in life, one upsizes. They get, like, for example, when my wife and I were married at first, we had a one-room small apartment, and we were, we didn't have any kids, and it was not very expensive at all. So then we had one child. So, okay, we have one child. We're still living in that same little room. And it seemed okay, But then when we had our second child, my wife said, "Oh, we got to get a bigger apartment." I said, "Okay." So we got a bigger apartment. Then we have a third child. My wife said, "Look, this is not big enough. We need we need more bigger apartment." So, okay, we had 6 children altogether. So everything started increasing. The size of the apartment, and now we need a backyard so they can play. And, the backyard's not big enough, got to get another backyard. And so everything kept increasing. And when we moved from our first apartment where we were living to the next apartment, it was bigger. And then because we had 6 kids, we ended up with a big house, a big overhead, and a lot of, unnecessary things, because every time you move, you take all the junk with you. Right? You don't throw anything away. I said to my wife, look, maybe we don't need this. No, we have to take it with us. Okay. So we ended up taking all the junk that we had in the first house to the second house, and then all the junk in the second house we took to the third house, and all the junk we had in the third house we took to the fourth house. So it was never decreasing, it was always increasing. And a lot of the things we didn't need anymore, but there was attachment. So this is material life, right? I was saying to my wife, why don't we throw this thing away? No, we need it. Oh, okay. Can't say anything. So anyway, and also I had the same thing, my wife said, "Well, why do you need all these books?" I said, "No, we need all the books." And there were a lot of books. So she would say, "Oh, no, we need this." And I would say, "No, we need this." So therefore, every time we moved, we had to get a bigger and bigger truck to move it. Right. So That's the material life. You get you start with nothing, and then you get a whole bunch of things that you get attached to, and you can't even imagine throwing them away, or giving them away. But at the moment of death, everything goes away. You see, so better have less than more. You know, less things than more, because all those things just complicate your life. Every time you buy a new gadget, well, you have to read, the book that explains how to use that gadget, and you spend a whole time trying to understand, how to use it and how to maintain it, and there's a whole new set of things that you have to do to responsibly maintain all the gadgets you buy. Whereas, caveman, the only gadget he had was a big stick or a big thing like that, and he'd go around, and hit animals over their head and then eat them, right? So he didn't have a lot of gadgets, But today, there are millions of gadgets. Just go to Costco, you'll see all the gadgets, and you go to Costco to buy some bananas, but they're way in the back of the store, all the food items.
Yeah.
So you have to walk through the whole store to get to the bananas. So there was this one man, his wife told him, go get some bananas and go to Costco because they're on sale. Okay. So he goes to Costco, and the bananas are way in the back. And before he gets to the bananas, he buys a whole bunch of things because they're cheap, they're on sale. And he forgets to buy the bananas. And then when he goes home, his wife said, did you get the bananas? He said, oh my God. He said, I forgot. Said, what do you mean you forgot? What did you get? Well, he said, I got a brand new this, and I got a brand new that. And, he bought a whole bunch of things, but not the bananas, And that's the, let's say, the organized way that Costco works. They put a whole bunch of things before you get to the one thing you want. So the bananas are, 10 cents a pound or something like that, right? So that's in the the thing that you see on the publicity of Costco, bananas 10 cents a pound. So oh, let me go and get it. It's really cheap. But on the way, other things seem to be cheap too. Actually, they're not. So it's usually Costco is not cheaper than other stores. There's just a few products that they advertise that are cheaper, but most of the other things are almost the same prices everywhere. So you end up, instead of just buying, 2 pounds of bananas, you end up with, a big push cart full of gadgets and things and clothing and shoes and this and that. So that's called the consumer nation. America is a consumer nation. It's consuming things all the time. And because of that, the junkyards in America are getting huge. Because all those things eventually, you get tired of them, you just throw them away, and it ends up, in the junkyard. That includes cards, that includes cars, shoes, and clothing. So many things are just junk. And it's unfortunate that we're such a consumer country. But you could say, well, if everyone stops consuming, then there would be bankruptcy. How can all these stores, how can all these big companies manufacture so many things that are not needed if no one is willing to buy them? But wait a minute, most of this stuff is unneeded. Why should they buy them? Well, because it looks attractive. Like someone can have, a 19 1999 Ford, let's say. But when he sees the new Ford, he says, wow, it's got this, it's got that, it's better. he sits down in one, at the Ford company, and it feels really nice. And so, you want to take a ride in it? You want to drive around the block? He said, yeah. He drives it around the block, and it feels really good. So then he gets rid of the older one he has, which is just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But he gets rid of that to get the new one, right? And there are people that every year they change their car. They drive it for 1 year and then they sell it and get a new one. You know anybody like that?
I know people who is changing in every 3 years.
Every 3 years, yeah.
Or 4 sometimes. But
What's interesting, someone like Warren Buffett, he hasn't changed his car his whole life.
right.
He's got an older car. I mean, Warren Buffett is really rich, right? One of the richest people in the world. Still driving the same car, still living in the same house. That's probably why he's so rich, because he doesn't spend his money foolishly. And there's a saying, if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it, right?
Yeah.
So, if you have a nice shirt, but it's really old, but it doesn't have any tears in it or anything, then why throw it away or give it away? You continue to wear it. You don't have to buy more shirts. Okay. It says here in this verse, the most unfortunate persons are the impersonals who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. And what is that? That means that there are people called impersonalists. They can't understand of all the variety that's in the spiritual world. They can't even understand there's a spiritual world. They just think that it's just the material world. Right? And if there is a spiritual world, there's nothing there, right? So the most unfortunate persons are the impersonalists who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. They are afraid to talk about the beauty of the Vaikuntha planets because they think that variegatedness must be material. Such impersonalists think that the spiritual world is completely void, or in other words, that there is no variegated. This mentality is described here as kul kata mati bini, intelligence bewildered by unworthy words. The philosophies of voidness and of the impersonal situation of the spiritual world are condemned here because they bewilder one's intelligence. Yeah, so they say nirakar, nirakar, nirakar. Everything is zero. Or everything is static. There's all kinds of speculative things. And because, you can't really understand what's in the spiritual world by speculating. You can only understand by hearing from bona fide devotees and reading bona fide shastras. There's no, let me ask you a question. All of you have gone to school, maybe colleges also. Did they ever teach you what's in Vaikuntha? No, they don't. They avoid the question completely. What's in the spiritual? No, they don't care. Let's just worry about the material world, how to make money. So this is the sad state of the culture today. There's real information given about the spiritual worlds. You might say, oh, but we have Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, how many people are reading Bhagavad Gita? And most of the Bhagavad Gitas are written by Mayavadis, so they're misleading, or they give their own interpretations of what Krishna originally said. So they come to the point to accept Bhagavad Gita as it is and follow the regulative principles of Krishna consciousness is very rare. Most people are not interested. They want to know, how they can make more money on the stock market. That they spend a lot of time on. They all want to be like Warren Buffett, make millions and millions of dollars on the stock market. or they want to go to the horse races and bet on horses to make money by gambling. Or they just go up and they just go into a bar and start drinking and getting drunk all the time. Or they taking marijuana or something. So you see, there's so many people in this world, but how many of them are actually devotees? Not many. If you look at all the population of the world, very few people actually try and become genuine devotees of Krishna. Now, why is it? Because Maya is very strong. Maya can even entice devotees. You know, sometimes you're not satisfied with the car you have because you're not satisfied. Why? There's nothing wrong with your car, but your neighbor got a bigger and nicer car. So that you get really upset. How come that idiot has such a nice car? So you say, I'm going to get a bigger car than you. So this type of, not being satisfied by either, publicity or because your neighbor got a bigger car than you do or whatever. So these type of things are due to not having a spiritual life. When you have a spiritual life, you're satisfied with whatever Krishna is doing. And you try and maintain minimalist life, not extravaganza. Like you look at movie stars, they have really nice clothes, they're all expensive. Well, you can buy clothes that are not so expensive, right? And serves the same purpose as clothes that are very expensive. You can buy, let's say, a coat or a shirt that costs, $150 or $300 or $1,000. Right? But you can also buy a shirt for like, $10, and it serves the same purpose, it just covers your body. But no, some people have to have the shirt that costs $1,000. And then they show it off, no, my shirt's $1,000, my ring is, $10,000, my watch is $20,000, my this, my that. But my stool is the same as your stool. And I can't even sell it, right? You can sell your watch, you can sell your stool. So ultimately, we have to live a minimalist life, and all the extra things we have, extra money, this, that, we should use it in Krishna's service. And just have enough that maintains the body and the soul together, but is not extravagant. More people have died by overeating than not undereating. Why? Because, they're eating so many different, you go to Costco, there's so many things there you can buy, right? And so many things you didn't think you were going to buy. But once you get in there and see, oh, this is on sale, that's on sale. And things that are, useless, basically. It's not going to enrich your life in any way. You get an enriched life when you learn even one verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Now your life is really enriched because it can save you from making many mistakes. But all the things you buy in Costco, none of those things are going to save you from birth and death. And so it's better to be a minimalist. Just take minimal things. Anything excess to that, you use in Krishna's service. Okay, so it says here, it is very much regrettable that unfortunate people do not discuss the description of the Vaikuntha planets, but engage in topics which are unworthy to hear and which bewilder one's intelligence. Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take to talk of the mundane world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. Oh boy, this is something this. If your teacher says write something, write something in one paragraph, and if you write that in a paragraph, the teacher will look at it. Where'd you get this from? Well, those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take the talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. So that's what's going on in schools today. They're talking of the material world, and they're not talking about Vaikuntha at all. That means that you will be thrown into the darkest region of ignorance. In other words, all that so-called knowledge that's in school it's going to lead you to ignorance. It's not really going to lead to helping you go back to God. So what is it that you learn in school? Well, you learn that basically there's no God and there's nothing after death. And that the real goal of life is sense gratification. And all kinds of false things. So you don't really get an education in modern schools today. You actually learn things that are not exactly true or completely false. And therefore, instead of getting an education, you get ignorance of okay, so this verse says the most unfortunate persons are the impersonals who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. Well, nobody, I mean, is there any class you're taking in school today that teaches you about the variegatedness of the spiritual world? No. So, what's the most important thing? There's no education about that. Give it to kids. Of course, you have to learn that through Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, but those books are not used in most schools. There are some schools that use those two books, but very, very few. Okay, so the most unfortunate persons are the impersonalists who cannot understand the transcendental variegatedness of the spiritual world. They're afraid to talk about the beauty of the Vaikuntha planets because they think that variegatedness must be material. So what does that mean? If you think that variegatedness must be material, that means that you think the spiritual world is being void. That materialism, that variegatedness is only in the material world, and that's not true. The variegatedness that you see in the material world is a perverted reflection of the variegatedness of the spiritual. In other words, everything that's in the material world is in the spiritual world except demons. And but in the spiritual world, everything is in its pristine state, it's eternal. And in the material world, everything you see is temporary. So there's sat and asat. In the spiritual world, everything is sat. In the material world, everything is asat, temporary. So what we're dealing with in the material world, it comes into, it's produced, let's say in a factory, you get it and use it, and eventually it's thrown away. It becomes junk. But in the spiritual world, everything's eternal. It never becomes junk. They don't have junkyards in the spiritual world. All the junkyards are in the material world. All the junk people also are in the material world. Material world. So therefore, we're not in a great place. We're in a place where there's forgetfulness of Krishna. And therefore, you have to make a real effort to know something about Krishna, because unless you go to some kind of special school, you're not going to hear anything about Krishna in the material schools. All the things that you learn about are about, George Washington and women's liberation, and different types of theories about, gender. Yes.
And already there's like every single Friday in the morning.
Yeah.
There's something about like the school celebrates a different type of like person that so-called did something good.
Can you name one or two of those persons that you heard of?
Martin Luther King.
Yeah, Martin Luther King is one. Can't remember. Something Ruby something.
What?
Ruby something. I don't remember the last name.
That's good. It's good you can't remember because it's not worth knowing. Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King, he went to India to find out about nonviolence. Gandhi, he had a lot of respect for Gandhi and wanted to figure out if he could use what Gandhi did to in the United States to sort of instead of trying to overthrow the government of the United States to have peaceful way of changing society. Now, don't forget, what Gandhi did led to him being murdered. Yeah, assassinated. Whoa. What Martin Luther King did also got him assassinated. Now, why did they assassinate Martin Luther King? Let's look at that. That's basically the same reason why Gandhi was assassinated. Yes.
They teach what like the whole story of his life and what they.
Who does? Who
my
teaches
teacher.
about Martin Luther King?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. He basically does it in reading and mostly during Martin Luther King Day. I don't know why they named the day after him. And
Oh, he's considered a hero.
yeah. And he got put in jail, and then when he came out, he still did the same thing.
He did what?
But,
Same thing? What's the same thing?
walking, like
Yeah,
holding up signs, having a parade or something.
yeah. Well, both Gandhi and Martin Luther King were assassinated. Why?
Because there were people on the opposite side, like.
Well, when Martin Luther King was only talking about, freeing Black people from all kinds of discrimination and deprivation of, access to education and things like that. No one was going to thinking about assassinating him. But as soon as he started talking about the Vietnam War, and now he was not talking about Black people only, he was talking about white people also. And something that would, in a sense, put a doubt in people's mind about why are we at war, in Vietnam. That's when he was assassinated. When he was just talking about giving Black people, more equality with white people, nobody tried to assassinate him. As soon as he tried to talk about the Vietnam War and how and now he's talking not only about Black people, now he's talking about white people also. That's when he was assassinated.
He sanctioned the war, Maharaj.
No, he was against it.
He was against the war.
Yeah, he was trying, that's why he was assassinated. When he was just talking about Black people and getting the, like equality with white people, as far as, you don't have to sit in the back of the bus and, you can go to the same schools and things like that. Okay, then it was fine. But as soon as he went into more, let's say, sensitive politics, that's when he was assassinated.
But both can create the hatred, right, Maharaj? If he's supporting for the Black people also, the white people, one of the white person can get mad and do the similar violence. Right?
Well, I mean, no, the point was this war going on, right? And now he was only talking about equality for black people. But then he started talking about, how the Vietnam War was not good. And now you're talking about black and white people and creating doubt about what's the United States doing in this war. Why isn't it engaged in this war? So that's when he was assassinated. He went out of let's say the specific thing of giving equality for black people and white people, right? And now he's talking about the war that's going on, and now it's not just equality for black people. It's about why are we in this war, you know? So he was assassinated. He went outside of his what would be considered his safe zone. The safe zone was he's trying to help all black people have equality with white people, right, and eliminate all what's called Jim Crow laws. Look that up, Jim Crow laws. These are all the laws that denied black people the same, let's say, assets and potentials as white people. Jim Crow laws.
The Jim Crow, the person who put together those laws, Maharaj.
Who, Jim Crow? I don't know.
The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws introduced in the southern United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that enforced racial segregation. Jim Crow being a pejorative term of a
Pejorative.
pejorative term for an African American. Such laws remained in force until 1965.
Yeah, see, after the go ahead.
Formal and informal segregation policies were present in other areas of the United States as well, even as several states outside the South had banned discrimination in public accommodations and voting. Southern laws were enacted by white-dominated state legislators, redeemers to disenfranchise and remove political and economic gains but made by African Americans during the Reconstruction era. Such continuing.
That was after the Civil War. The whole Civil War was fought to free the blacks. And then the Reconstruction was, a period when the blacks would get the same opportunities as the whites, right, for education and business and all these things. So these Jim Crow laws were a set of laws even after the Civil War that again limited the blacks from having the same opportunities as the whites. So they did it in a different way, let's say, rather than a brutal way of segregation. They did it in a different way called Jim Crow laws. Okay, does it say what Jim Crow laws are? Does it say?
No.
Jim Crow laws were a manifestation of authoritarian rule specifically directed at one racial group.
Meaning blacks. They have to sit at the back of the bus, they can't sit in the front of the bus, they can't sit next to a white woman and things like that.
Black people still elected local offices throughout the 1980s in local areas with large black populations. Their voting was suppressed for created national elections. Basically, the Jim Crow mandated equality but segregation.
Yeah, so you have what's called the black, black neighborhoods. Everyone's black, no white people. And then it's very hard for a black person to buy a house in a white neighborhood. In other words, okay, there was no more slavery, but now there was separation.
Separate but equal.
Separate but equal.
That's their.
But unfortunately, most of the schools in the black neighborhoods were very bad. All the good schools were in the white neighborhoods. So again, there was a type of the segregation led to black people not being able to advance as much as the white people. So although they said everyone's equal, but equals but separated. So they had to also stop that. Now it's everything is stopped. So there's not much let's say there are different things now that people are fighting for.
That's what you said, Maharaj. It says, although in theory, the equal segregation doctrine governed public facilities and transportations too, facilities for African Americans were consistently inferior and underfunded compared to facilities for white Americans. Sometimes there were no facilities for the black community at all. Far from equality as a body of law, Jim Crow institutionalized economic, educational, political, and social disadvantages and second-class citizenship for most African Americans living in the United States. After the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was founded in 1909, it became involved in a sustained public protest and campaigns against the Jim Crow laws and the so-called separate but equal doctrine.
Separate but equal doctrine. In other words, a black man couldn't buy a house in a white neighborhood, things like that. And but they could buy a house. Yeah. But in their own neighborhood, not the white neighborhood.
Yeah, some signs. And there's one sign here that the definition you just said. There's this one sign. It says, we want white tenants in our white community. So
Yeah,
it looks like
right,
that.
right.
Signs like there's signs like that.
Yeah. So all that has been stopped now. But there are still ghettos of black neighborhoods in the United States. I used to live, let's see, our family lived in a mixed neighborhood, blacks and whites. It wasn't all blacks, but there were neighborhoods in Philadelphia, all black, no whites at all. And they were usually not very good places to be. More crime, and people were poor, and so forth. It's still going on in many ways. Not as bad as it was before, but it's still there. Okay, so
We have another 5 minutes.
here in the Bhagavatam, in this verse, this is verse 3, chapter 15,
23.
number 23. Here in the Bhagavatam, in this verse particularly, it is stressed that people who try to discuss and understand the real spiritual nature of the spiritual sky and the Vaikunthas are fortunate. The variegatedness of the Vaikuntha planets is described in relation to the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. But instead of trying to understand the spiritual abode and the spiritual activities of the Lord, people are more interested in politics and economic developments. They hold many conventions, meetings, and discussions to solve the problems of this worldly situation, where they can remain only for a few years, but they are not interested in understanding the spiritual situation of Vaikuntha. If they are at all fortunate, they become interested in going back home, back to Godhead, but unless they understand the spiritual world, they are not.
The rot.
They rot in this material darkness continuously. So we should be interested in knowing what's going on in the spiritual world, but you can only get that knowledge in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, what's going on in the spiritual world? First of all, it's eternal. Secondly, it's only full of people who have successfully developed their Krishna consciousness in the material world. And because of that, they have a possibility of entering into the spiritual world, where there's no birth, death, old age, and disease. It's only transcendental activities of love for Krishna. And so there's a huge difference, an incredible, huge difference between the material world and the spiritual world. Everything is temporary in the material world. Everything is eternal in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, the bodies that people have are very similar to the body of Narayana. They walk around with 4 arms. So it's very difficult for people to understand the spiritual world. You know, even if you read it, they still, not really sure if it's something they can actually accept. It's the truth. And in the spiritual world, there's no lust, anger, greed. The 3 modes of material nature do not act, do not control the activities of the people. And there's no anxiety. And if you want to eat, you can eat. If you don't want to eat, you don't have to eat because you have an eternal body. And there's so many different things that are different in the material world and the spiritual world. But everything that's in the spiritual world is in the material world, except for demons. There are demons in the spirit. They hear about demons in the spiritual world, but there are no actual demons there. Now, previous time, there was just a few demons like Ravana, Kumbhakarna. Today, there are many demons in the world. Hundreds and millions of them. So you see, times have changed. But in the spiritual world, there are no demons, but they hear about demons sometimes. That's all. Yeah. So I guess we'll stop there. Are there any questions?
So,
Yes.
So, when I was at school, I tried to explain that story you said about the couple that was going to the Chinese restaurant, and then they said when I tried to explain the story, when I was halfway through
About the dog?
yeah, it was about the dog.
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain the story to them, and they said that it's racist, and I was like, I don't know what you mean by it's racist. I don't think it's racist.
Who said it's racist? The teacher or the other kids?
The kids
Did the teacher say it was racist?
say to the teacher.
Oh, the kid said it was racist
Yeah.
because you're speaking about some Chinese people. Right? If you said it was not Chinese people, they were American people, they might have said it's not racist. But because you said it was a Chinese guy, what he left his dog outside tied to a leash, said it. Yeah. And then he went into a Chinese restaurant and they gave him the menu, but it was all in Chinese. So I didn't know what it was. So the person went in, tied his dog to something outside. He didn't bring him into the Chinese restaurant. And then the Chinese people couldn't speak English, and the American guy couldn't speak Chinese. So they gave him a menu that's all in Chinese. So he sort of pointed at something, and the Chinese guy said, "Oh, yeah, we have that." And then afterwards, after he eats the meal, he goes outside, and the leash of his dog is there, but his dog is not there. So he's like confused what happened. So he goes back in and he said, my dog's not here. And one of the Chinese guys knows a little bit of English. So, oh, but you told us to cook your dog. So, I mean, most of the Chinese waiters, they couldn't speak English, right? And he couldn't speak Chinese. But what they understood he wanted was, he put his dog outside so he could eat it. So that might be interpreted as being something that's racist, making fun of the Chinese people. But actually, the man ate the dog, so he was satisfied, but then when he went out to get the dog, only the leash was there. And then he found out that the Chinese people thought he wanted to eat the dog. So they took the dog and they cooked it and they served it to him. And he ate it. So that might be considered a racist story. But it's funny because it just proves that, whether you eat a cow or you eat a dog, it's the same thing. You're eating a living entity, and it's better not to do that. But people are now they eat cockroaches. It's getting worse and worse now. People eat cockroaches.
In Mexico, it's a very big popularity.
Yeah.
They even put one movie I watched, they put it on the movie.
Yeah. Well, it's like you would say, they fry the cockroaches in oil, so now it tastes much better and it's a little crispy.
Yeah, they eat stick bugs. And they say they taste like apples.
Really, it tastes like an apple. Yeah. Well, I'm going to skip that one. That's for sure. Okay, so I guess we'll stop there with the stink bugs. Is it juicy, the stink bug? If you bite into it, there's some stink bug blood go into your mouth or something.
I think
They fry it. Anything that's fried with a lot of greasy oil, sometimes it tastes good because of all the grease. Like, for example, I remember when I was a kid, everything I would eat, I would put ketchup on. Without the ketchup, I couldn't eat it. Really?
Any other questions or comments online?
So here's the new book. All about
Lord Venkateshwara Balaji.
Balaji.
Maharaj is showing the new book that got published by Maharaj, Lord Sri Venkateshwara or Lord Balaji.
Just in time for the Balaji, the
Installation of
relations will take place today, tomorrow, the next day. Haribol.
Haribol. Thank you.
Get your new book.